Hello, New York Giants fans. Welcome back to the Everything New York Giants podcast with New York Giants Fangirl. I'm your host, Adriana. In today's episode, we're going to go ahead and recap episode 3 of Hard Knocks and then talk about the last 10 of the Giants 100 players that they have announced. So I am loving Hard Knocks so far. I know there's been some mixed feelings. I'm not so sure why. I have loved every second of it. I think it's really given us an opportunity to see the behind the scenes things that we don't normally get to see. And, especially in this episode, hearing how the negotiations went down with a lot of players, that they had to up their guarantees and up the amount of money in years and things like that. All that stuff we were never privy to. So I am loving it. I watched the episode live last night, but then I had to go ahead and watch it this morning so I could focus enough to take notes. So I'm going to go through my notes because there was just no way that I was going to be able to remember everything. So let's start with the Saquon thing. This is the last time I ever want to talk about this because I'm so sick of talking about it. But obviously it was a big feature in the episode, so we have to go through it. So what I thought was interesting about this is when they open the scene and Schoen talks to Saquon's agent, Ed Berry, he gives him very specific numbers. And if you remember correctly, this was before the official tampering window opened. But yet, Ed Berry had some very specific numbers on what he thought, quote unquote, thought Saquon was going to get. And that was $12.5 million per year for 3 years, $25 million guaranteed. So then Shane says to Barry, so if the Giants go ahead and offer that, Saquon's going to sign the deal, be a Giant, we'll do the press conference immediately, we can do it tomorrow. And Ed, you can tell by Joe's face, and he kind of reiterates this when he tells Mara later in the episode, that it wasn't a done deal. So if the Giants went ahead and offered him that amount, that supposedly this magical number that came out of nowhere from Ed Berry, just plucked it out of thin air, that he was going to go ahead and sign the deal. And, there was no confirmation in that. So I think that this proves that there was some tampering involved. So I thought that was very interesting. So there were a couple things on Saquon. Let's just finish the whole thing here. So Barry also said, later in the episode that another team was going north of that. And that's when Schoen said, okay, we're out. We can't match that. So yes, the Giants never offered Saquon a deal. I think Schoen felt like, well, if this is the number, the $12.5 million, 25 guaranteed for 3 years, if that's the number and he's not going to commit to that, then what are we doing here? Why bother? So then, Ed Berry comes back and says that, teams are even going north of that. And Joe is like, I'm out of here, not happening. So my English bulldog, Marcy, has joined us again. She will be sleeping in approximately 30 seconds. So one thing I also wanted to talk about with the Saquon thing, I tried to keep all of my notes all in one spot. So it's when Shane and Mara are talking, and it seems like Shane is a little bit nervous having to break the news to Mara that it's likely that Saquon is not going to be a Giant anymore. What I also thought was interesting was the text that Schoen got. I need someone to come through and say that was me. Like, I want to hear who said that Chicago was the one who was driving up the price and that the Eagles were indeed out. Here's what I think happened. I think that text was true. And then I think that when Shane said to Barry, if we offer him this deal and, is he going to be a Giant? And Barry said, well, I don't know. I think Ed Berry went back to Saquon, told him that, and I think that's when the Eagles got back involved and said, we have the opportunity here to steal Saquon, and he will definitely be an Eagle. All we have to do is offer him a little bit more money, go a little bit north of that, and we'll go ahead and do it. And I think that's exactly what happened, and I think that's when Saquon went to the Eagles. So speaking of the Eagles, Maris says that he's going to have a tough time sleeping if Barkley goes to Philly. Now, that was specifically, seems like it was cut out of the trailer, but we saw it in this episode. He didn't say he's going to have a hard time sleeping if he goes. If he goes to Philly were the exact words that he used. And he also said because he's our most popular player. So what I think is interesting about this too, and needs to just be reiterated for a second, is John Mara is the owner, okay? He is not making the football decisions. The GM is the one making the decisions. If it was up to John Mara, he would have paid Saquon Barkley whatever he wanted to make him a Giant, because he knows that Saquon is going to sell jerseys and he's going to sell tickets. Now, I personally feel like with Saquon gone, people are still going to go to Giants games. They're still going to buy jerseys. They're just not going to be Saquon jerseys. So I understand his thought process behind that, but I think everyone needs to realize exactly how that scene played out is how things go. Joe Schoen is running the scene when it comes to bringing in players and everything like that, and Mara is voicing his 2 cents and his concerns as an owner of how that's going to affect the organization. As he should, that's his right. At the end of the day, Schoen is the one who's saying, listen, we only have X amount of money. You saw what happened to our quarterbacks last year. We need to focus on the offensive line. And there's other running backs out there that we can bring in. So I thought that was great. I think that's exactly how things go. And I just hope that everyone understands that that's the way that it is. And what I also thought was interesting was when they showed all of them watching the announcement on TV that Saquon was signing with the Eagles. As Mara got ready to leave, Shane said to him, it's fine, we're going to be fine. And Mara said, I know we're going to be fine. So they're fine. It's going to be fine, guys. Everyone who's still freaking out about it needs to relax a little bit. Okay, so we're done with the Saquon thing. I don't want to hear anything else about it. We are moving on. March 11th, we know at 12 p.m. the offers can start. So this is where Daves and Shane are getting together. They have their little scene where they're confirming that the interior offensive line is the move. Kind of think this was a little scripted for the cameras. We all know that that was the plan going into free agency. I don't want to hear that they were not on the same page, that interior offensive line was a necessity. We all knew that. Either way, it was entertaining to see them be about it. Dable seems very reserved, and you can tell he's not fully himself in front of the cameras, which I think we would probably all agree with. Next, we have to talk about in terms of the offensive line. Runyon, Hunt, and Illuminor were the 3 top targets for the Giants. Obviously, depending on finances and how things went with Brian Burns was going to be how they went about things. Shane specifically mentions John Michael Schmitz and Andrew Thomas, saying that these guys are going to be here for the next 3 years. And then if we can bring in a Hunt, a Illuminor, a Runyon, we've got a potential starting right tackle, a potential starting right guard that can step in, and Illuminor that can step in immediately. So I thought it was really interesting that there was no mention of Evan Neal being here for the next 3 years. When they're talking about signing players for 3 years at a time, which is what they did with Runyon, they would have done it with Illuminor, but as we learned in this episode, he only wanted a 2-year deal, which was interesting. But, their plan for the next 3 years sounds like it's not going to include Evan Neal unless he has an incredible year this year. So keep that in mind, because I know there's concerns from all of us, myself included, of is Evan Neal going to see the bench if he has 2 bad games? What is really going to happen there? So that kind of made me feel like, okay, this is Evan Neal's last hurrah. And if he doesn't get it together immediately, he's done. Very interesting. So they had expected Illuminor to go for around $5 or $6 million a year. They ended up signing him to a little bit more than that. They upped it to $7 million because he had interest from the Cardinals as well. And his contract is about $7 million a year, and there's no guaranteed money for 2025, which is very interesting. So I think that contract is incredible. I don't know how they worked that out and why Illuminor was on board for that, but I guess he kind of just felt like, we'll see how things go. Very interesting. So he's a guy that we've talked about a lot. I know a lot of us are excited about him. He did really well with the Raiders, and obviously he's going to be great here. Something else that I thought was interesting is that the Jets and Giants seem to be going after some of the same players, which was Illuminor and Runyon, which we know the Jets also need help on the offensive line, and Tyrod Taylor. And what I have to say about this is good work to the Giants, because we beat out the Jets for the 2 important players, which is the guard and the guard/tackle that this offensive line so desperately needed. And, I heard from a lot of people that they felt like the way things went last year, that Tyrod didn't really have any interest in coming back to the Giants. And I don't necessarily feel like that's exactly the vibe that I got from him. I understand where people see that, right? they ended up choosing DeVito as the starter over him. But DeVito ended up winning 3 games. And at the end of the day, winning is winning. So I just think that Tyrod, I don't know, maybe he felt like he wasn't going to get a chance to play this year and that's why he didn't want to come back. But I just was like, I mean, maybe you shouldn't have lost the Buffalo game and then would have been a different story. You know what I mean? So anyway, but they did really want Tyrod back. They offered him a new contract pretty much immediately, which again, I thought was interesting too, that they really felt like, you know, he was going to be worth the amount of money. I think they offered him about $7 million, and we know he ended up signing with the Jets for about $9 million. But the Jets also need a backup quarterback because Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers and their offensive line is their offensive line. So no surprises there. They also talked about in the quarterback situation, they threw around Gardner Minshew, which obviously was going to be out of their price range. He was going to be anywhere from $10 to $20 million a year. And Sam Darnold and Locke, who they thought were going to be around $4 million a year. And all I have to say is thank fucking God they did not sign Sam Darnold, because you guys complain about Drew Lock all you want. There is no argument that Drew Lock is not a better quarterback than Sam Darnold. It's just not even close. And we're going to see that week 1. So thank you for signing Drew Lock, because if Darnold and DeVito were our backups, pray for us is all I have to say. And then when they talked about the running backs outside of Saquon, you know, they talked about Devin Singletary, they call him Motor, for $5 million and Swift for about $6 million. Now, obviously they didn't sign DeAndre Swift. He ended up getting $8 million from the Bears. So I think the Giants just weren't going to compete with that in regards to a running back. And Singletary is a great back. And for $5 or $6 million, whatever he ended up getting, great deal. Something else I wanted to point out, that these were the Giants' targets. Quarterback, Tyrod, Drew Lock, Sam Darnold, Gardner Minshew. Running back, obviously Saquon, Devin Singletary, and DeAndre Swift. Offensive line, Robert Hunt, John Runyon, and Jermaine Illuminor. And then defensive line was Brian Burns. They hit on almost every single one of their targets. So the people saying that, oh, the Giants had a bad offseason and the team's not any better this year and we're going to be nothing without Saquon and blah, 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 blah. First of all, this is not golf. It's not a solo sport. The same people who are like, oh, Daniel Jones, can't do anything and he's out there by himself. He's not, okay? Just a reminder in case, I know it's been a while since we've all watched football, but there's 10 other guys besides the quarterback on the field at the same time. So anyway, I think it was really interesting, the fact that out of all their targets, they ended up getting mostly all of them, except obviously for Tyrod. I mean, they weren't going to sign 3 backup quarterbacks, and Saquon and Hunt obviously would have been amazing, but I think we all knew that this team needed so much help and they just didn't have enough money to give him a huge contract and then sign a couple other guys. So I think it worked out quite well. One thing that I wanted to point out with the John Runyon thing was because he came from the Packers, so obviously he played with Rodgers and he has that experience with Nathaniel Hackett, and that's something that one of the guys who's helping with the negotiations for the Giants brings up and says that if we want Runyon, he's not 100% that it's going to get it done, but they have to up the money. They have to up the salary to $10 million a year and match the guarantee, which they did, and it ended up working. So again, great job, Giants, for bringing him in. Something else that I want to point out that I thought was really interesting, and you see all of the behind the scenes of how much time, effort, and work goes into making their offseason board and who they think they're going to focus on in free agency and things like that. And Shane repeatedly says, like, we put all this time and energy into this, and at the end of the day, we never really know how it's going to go. The running back market is a perfect example of that, and some of the other markets, like the offensive line, like they had budgeted money for these guys. The Brian Burns thing is another perfect example. They had been talking about this since January. So at this point in March 11th, you're about 6 weeks into this, and they still don't know whether or not they're going to get the deal done. And, you know, they're doing everything on their end. You know, the Panthers were doing everything on their end. So I just think it's a really important point about free agency, is that they can have everything lined up and have everything planned on what they want to do, but it just doesn't mean that it's always going to work out. So, you know, good reminder for all of us. And, you know, I talked a lot about wanting Mike Onwenu this offseason, and obviously didn't work out. He re-signed with the Pats, but we got some other good offensive linemen who we also so desperately needed, who are going to come in and be better than what we had last year from day one. So it's going to make a big difference. let's talk about Burns briefly. Again, when Joe Schoen is talking about the fact that, they did all this work and they're hoping it's going to work out with Burns, but they really don't know until it's done. Something that I thought was interesting too was that he said, that was going to be our big plan, but as we're waiting for this to work out, you're watching other guys sign with other teams and you're trying to figure out, we're trying to pivot in the right direction, but this is the guy we want. We're in the works of trying to get it done. So you can only do so much in that waiting period, in the hurry up and wait until, things work out. But he did say that if it didn't work out with Burns, that they were going to have to focus on someone in the draft. So I thought that was interesting too. All of the clips of Burns with the sacks just made me so excited. I cannot wait to see him on the field. And the way that they talked about how, him and Kayvon on opposite sides is really going to be the best way to utilize them. And Bowen spoke so highly of him and how he can't wait and he's going to play a ton of snaps. I'm just really excited for him in this defense. Another thing I wanted to point out, the people saying that Joe Schoen is like, watching this makes him feels like he's an amateur and like they think it makes him look worse. I don't really know. Like if it's only about the Saquon thing, I mean, that's fine, I guess, but I just think you have to look at his whole body of work and what he's done. And when you see him negotiate with his buddy Dan Morgan and talk him off and say, no, we're not adding a 7th for Burns. Like, what the hell are you doing? We already went through. This is what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. And he gets the job done and didn't add in a 7th. So I felt like he's a good negotiator, and that was a good example of it. Obviously, we don't see all the negotiations that happen behind the scenes, but I'm just like, if everyone's just pissed about him from the Saquon thing, can you differentiate all the other things he's done outside of the Saquon thing? Make it make sense. You don't understand. The last thing on the Saquon thing was, why did we hear so much about him and nothing about McKinney? The Giants had repeatedly said that, McKinney was a guy that they wanted to bring back. So I don't know what the deal was. I don't know if it's from McKinney's side of things where they decided because he's no longer a Giant, they don't want him involved in the process and they don't want, the agent's conversations being shown. Like, I really don't know. It seemed bizarre to me that there was no talk about that whatsoever. The only thing they said was that Joe was really surprised, as were all of us, that he got paid $17 million a year for the Packers for a 4-year deal. He is now the second highest paid safety in the league. And I think we can all agree that McKinney is a good safety. Is he the second best in the league? Probably not. The Giants weren't going to pay him that, just like they weren't going to pay Saquon $13 million a year. So I thought it was interesting. Like, I wanted to hear more about the way the McKinney thing went down. I'm like sick of talking about Saquon every fucking episode. Like, where's McKinney? What happened here? So I don't know. Maybe there was not much to tell, but I don't think that's it. So the episode ends basically here with March 12th. They bring in Singletary, Burns. They have Drew Lock. He signed his 1-year, $5 million deal. I loved getting to see the behind the scenes with the families and all of them coming in for the first time, see how excited the players are. And, I just hope it's a good reminder for people that, like, every season is so different, and what they did this off season, and just want people to be a little bit excited. And when you look at how excited all of the players are in the building, and they're talking on social media, and the videos that they did, and how excited they are talking to everyone and signing their deals, I'm like, let's just bring some excitement into this year. It's a new year. It's a fresh start for everyone. We have some new solid players on the roster. We have a new defensive coordinator, like a new special teams coordinator. I just think there's a lot to be excited about, and I wish everyone wasn't so fucking negative all the time. Like, it's the off season. This is the only time where we are allowed to be optimistic, because as soon as camp starts, as soon as preseason starts, and as soon as week 1 starts, if any single person on the starting roster looks like shit, it's going to be the Giants are going to go out 0-17 this year. They're going to be picking 1 overall, and they're going to get Carson back, and that's it. And no one's going to give a shit about anything else. So let me and others be optimistic while we can, because chances are, I hope I'm wrong, it's not going to last as long as I would like it to. So the last thing I wanted to say is, if you didn't see the episode, the way that it ends is with Joe Schoen playing Uno with his family, and his oldest daughter, Sydney, is actually good friends with Dan Morgan's daughter, and they talk about how, the two girls are talking during the negotiation process and saying, like, their dads are doing the best they can, blah, blah, blah. So I thought it was interesting that they kind of brought that back into the conversation. And his son, Carson, was adorable, so they're all playing around. I don't know how old he is, but they're playing Uno around the table, and he's saying that, kids come up to him in school and tell him like what his dad should be doing and who he should be picking in the draft and all these sorts of things. And, he follows, I'm sure, the media training that his dad gave him and said, my dad's doing the best he can. He's going to pick the best player available. He's going to do whatever he can to make this team better. So I just thought it was a really sweet way to end the episode. They talk so much throughout the beginning of the episode of the stress on Schoen and everyone else in the building trying to get these deals done, and how much work and time and effort and all of this it takes, and then all of a sudden it's finally over, and everyone gets to relax a little bit. So I thought it was a great episode. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments. I am pulling up here real quick the last 10 players that they announced. So it's from 80 down to 71. So let's start with 80 here. We have William Roberts, number 79, Jeff Hostetler, which should be a familiar name to all of us. Number 78, Mark Hines. Number 77, John Mendenhall. Number 76, Gary Reasons. 75, Pepper Johnson. 74, Jack Gregory. 73, Don Chandler. 72, Ron Johnson. And 71, Antonio Pierce. So I give these guys a lot of credit for having to figure this out. I don't know how they did it. There are obviously hundreds and hundreds of Giants players who have been through this organization, played over a century, almost a century of seasons. It's very, very interesting, and I'm sure very challenging work, and it's been really fun as a fan to kind of walk down memory lane when they talk about some of these older players, some of us who are in our 30s, or some who are in their 20s or even younger, who don't know the guys like Gary Reasons and Pepper Johnson, and maybe even don't even know Antonio Pierce. So I think it's just been a fun way for all of us to kind of like relive all the fun of and the history of the organizations as we go into the 100th season. So I have enjoyed it, and I know there's going to be a lot more 100th season of the Giants content where that comes from. So with that being said, on Friday, I have a new podcast for you. I am going to preview training camp, talk about my position groups that I'm most excited to watch, and make some predictions on who I think or end up going to being the best players in those positions and who I think might make the 53. And I also just did a quick little intro for everyone who's new here, how I became a Giants fan, how I started this page, and all that sorts of stuff. So please subscribe, hit the bell so you get notified when all the new episodes come out on YouTube, and then subscribe or listen wherever you get podcasts. Follow me on Instagram at New York Giants Fangirl. Training camp is next week, and there is going to be a hell of a lot of content on my page day in and day out. I will be at all the weekday practices, so you can find everything you need to see about the Giants right on there. It's at New York Giants Fangirl. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll be back soon.